Hello and welcome back to PHP Basics. Today I'm going to show you how to process multiple checkboxes and also create this select all functionality that you see here. Now this is pretty straightforward and fairly easy to grasp. When working with databases, eventually you're going to have to display data in a tabular format and allow end users to be able to manipulate that data, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. Alright, so let's jump into our index.php page, and I'm just going to start off by creating a form. And I'm going to give this form the ID of form1. And the method will equal post. And inside of this form, I'm going to create a checkbox. And I'll just say input type equals checkbox. And I'm going to give this an ID of select all. And then outside of this checkbox, we'll just say select all to let the user know what this button does. So I'll do a paragraph break to kind of separate this from the other inputs, and I'm going to say input type equals checkbox, and the name is going to equal check, and the value we'll just say is going to equal value 1, and then next to that checkbox I'll show value 1, and we'll finish that off with a line break. So let me copy and paste this real quick, and I'll update these values as well. All right, so now that that's done, I will do another paragraph break, and I'm going to create a submit button. So input type is going to equal submit, and the name will equal submit as well. Okay, so now if I look at my page, this is what we see. Now, of course, my select all button isn't going to do anything just yet because it doesn't have any additional functionality tied to it yet. And that's where the Jquery comes in. So if you go to Google and simply search Google Jquery, your first result should be this hosted libraries, and you can simply copy this script right here. And I'm going to throw that into the top of my page. All right, so below that, we'll create a script and close that script. And the first thing that we always do when referencing Jquery is make sure that the document has been loaded or the page has been loaded. So we'll say $document.ready, and then inside of this, we're going to create a function. So everything that happens in here will happen after the page is ready to go. All right, so we're going to reference the select all that is located inside of form 1. The reason we do that is because you may actually have multiple forms on the page, and we want to specify which one that is. When referencing an element, we simply do that by placing a $, and then if it's an ID, then in quotes, you would use the hashtag, and then we're going to reference form1, and then form ID is going to equal is select all. Okay, so whenever we click on that, we're going to perform another function. So I'll say function. Be careful about your syntax when using Notepad++, because a lot of times it won't put the end character in there. So just make sure that your highlights match up and that your syntax is correct. Okay, so basically whenever we click the select all checkbox inside of form 1, then we also want inside of form 1 input type equals checkbox. So essentially anything that's a checkbox inside of form 1 dot prop, which is the property, and we're going to say checked and then comma this dot checked. Okay, so anything that is checked inside of form 1 is going to check it or uncheck it based on whether it was previously checked or not. So let's go ahead and save this. We'll take a look at our page. And now if I click the select all button, then it's going to select all of these values. Okay, so now let's submit this and see if we can process all of these values here. So I'll put in my PHP tags. I'll say if is set post submit. Then if I echo the posted value of check, let's see what happens whenever I select all of my boxes and I hit submit. It's going to display value 4. And the reason is all of these checkboxes have the same name. So it's going to cycle through each checkbox and it's going to use the value of the last one that it finds. We actually need to submit these as an array. Simply just put brackets at the end of each one of these, and then that will turn this into an array. And if I load the page again, select all, and hit submit, you can see now we're getting this array to string conversion, and it's throwing a fit because we're now using an array. So to process an array, we simply use for each. So we'll say for each post checkbox as value. So it's going to take the value of each checkbox and assign it to a variable called value. Okay, so now if I was to echo value and then put a line break after that, then process our form again. Let's see here. I'm sorry, it was check, not checkbox, check. We can see now it's demonstrating value 1 through 4. So now let's introduce database values. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to remove most of this. Let's keep everything except the form itself. All right, so inside of the top of my PHP tags, I'm going to include my database connection, which is simply db.inc.php. And let's take a look at that real quick. So I've got this other document right here. And this is my connection to my database using PDO. Essentially, I'm trying to create a variable filled with a new PDO, the driver of MySQL. My host is localhost. My database name is test. We're using a character set of UTF-8, my username, and my password. And if that fails, then it's going to catch the PDO exception, assign it to a variable called E, and then the script is going to die and it's going to display that message. So if I were to put an extra character in my database name, let's go ahead and refresh my page here, and it's going to say unknown database. All right, so let's go ahead and correct that. All right, so now I'm going to populate these checkboxes and fields within PHP. All right, so what I can do is underneath the script here, I'm just going to put my form back in. So form ID is going to equal form1. Method is going to equal post. And I'm going to start a table. I tell you, we won't style it. So a table, and then we're going to do some headers. So we're going to have select all, and I'll copy these. And I tell you what, before I go on, let's take a look at our database. So I've got a database called test, and inside of test, I have a table called employee. And then if we look here, we have some values: first name, last name, job title, and salary, and whether the account is currently enabled or not. So let me make all of these enabled real quick. Okay, so these accounts are all enabled, and this is what we're going to populate our database with, or populate our page with. All right, so the select all, so this is going to be first name, last name, title, and salary. All right, so if we look at our page right now, it's going to look like this, which these are just table headers. However, I'm going to replace this select all with a checkbox. So we'll say input type equals checkbox, and the ID, just like before, is going to equal select. We'll go ahead and give this table a border so we can see it just a little bit better. A cell padding equals 5 and cell spacing equals 0. Well, you can kind of see what this looks like. All right, so now let's start populating our data. So after that, we're going to jump back into PHP. I'm going to say statement equals db prepare, since we're using prepared statements. And I'm going to say select all from employee where enabled equals 1. So it's going to show me all of our enabled employees. Okay, so now all I have to do is statement execute, because we're not passing any variables into this. And then I can say while stmt fetch, we'll say f for first name is going to equal, I'm sorry, I did this wrong. I'm going to say row equals stmt fetch equals row first name. And then I will update these with all of the values that we're using. All right, so I essentially created our variables to save time and space with first name, last name, title, salary, and then I also want to grab the ID number, and all we have to do from this point is echo out the table data. So I'm going to say echo, and we're going to start a table row, and we'll have our first column is going to be a checkbox. So we'll say input type equals checkbox. The name is going to equal check, and remember we have to put brackets around that, and the value is going to equal ID, and then we'll close that column. And then we'll do a column for the first name, a column for the last name, a column for the title, and a column for the salary. And then we'll go ahead and close our table row. So while it keeps finding records that meet this criteria, it's going to populate a row in our table. Let me just look over this real quick. make sure that we didn't mess anything up. So let me go ahead and refresh the page. And we can see here that it has now populated all of our information. And if I check this box, then it's going to select all of our records because I saved that part of the script from before right up here at document.ready, form 1, select all, and then any kind of checkbox is going to be checked if it's inside of form 1, and it is. All right, so now outside of our table, I'll just do another page break and I'll put an input type equals submit. Name is going to be disable and the value will be disable employee. So now essentially it's the same thing, only I've got a button down here. All right, so up at the top, we'll say if is set post disable, then for each post as value. And then of course the value of each checkbox is going to be whatever ID that particular row was. So we're basically grabbing an identifier that tells us the rest of these attributes inside of that row. And then we can do something with that row. And we're simply going to say stmt equals db prepare. And we're going to update employee set enabled equals 0 where ID equals, and then we're going to use a placeholder for ID and then limit 1. So let me shrink this down a little bit, or I'll tell you what, I'll just back this up so you can see it. So update employee, and we're going to set enabled equals 0 where the employee ID equals whatever this placeholder turns out to be. And all we have to do is stmt bind param, and we're going to bind the value to this ID. So we'll specify the ID placeholder followed by a comma and then value. And then we have to execute it. So stmt execute. Now stmt is just short for statement. It's what I use. It's what you'll typically see on PHP's official website. It's just kind of the standard that you use for prepared statements. All right, so let me save this and we'll refresh our page. And I'm going to select all, and I'm just going to unselect some of these. And whenever we click on disable employee, those are going to go away. Okay, so now if I look in my database again, we can see that the ones that I had selected had been changed to 1. Okay, so that is essentially how you do this. Now you could have a picture of a trash can here and say select all and then delete or edit or whatever the case may be. But this is how you would process multiple tabular forms of data using checkboxes. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Thank you and take care. I'll see you next time.